Imagine the roar of an open highway in the late 60s, chrome flashing in the sun, raw power humming beneath you, and the unmistakable sense that this machine isn't just transportation, it's a declaration. Riders craved speed and muscle, but also something with presence, a design that spoke to freedom at a glance. It wasn't about comfort or convenience, it was about capturing a cultural moment when engines were expected to be bigger, louder, and stronger than ever before. This was the age when one decision from the engineers could alter the course of motorcycling history, and one new engine design could elevate a brand from the garage to the center of American identity. To understand how it happened, and why its impact still lingers decades later, we need to trace the story of a machine that defined both a company's direction and a generation's idea of power. Buckle in. This isn't just about metal and mechanics, it's about the pulse of an era that still echoes on the road today. If you're ready, hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments which machine we should dive into next. The Harley-Davidson Shovelhead of 1966 arrived at a pivotal moment. When riders were demanding more power, and the company needed to refresh its identity without abandoning the heritage that made it iconic. This V-twin wasn't created in a vacuum. It was born out of years of incremental progress and a rapidly shifting American landscape where freeways stretched further. Bikes were expected to keep up with higher speeds, and cultural expectations were beginning to change. Harley-Davidson had already leaned on the panhead engine through the 50s, but by the mid-60s that motor was showing its limits. What the Shovelhead promised was not just more performance, but a visual and mechanical statement that Harley intended to remain the standard bearer for big American motorcycles. At first glance, the design choices might seem like modest updates, reshaped rocker covers that gave the engine its shovel nickname. Some adjustments to airflow, new aluminum heads. But in reality, these were critical evolutions aimed at squeezing out more horsepower while keeping costs manageable for the company. Harley's engineers faced a balancing act. They had to deliver something faster and more durable without alienating the riders who saw Harley as the authentic, no-compromise American brand. It's worth noting that 1966 was not just about mechanics, it was about reputation. This engine had to prove that Harley-Davidson could compete not just with another manufacturer across town, but with imports that were starting to trickle in from overseas, bringing fresh ideas about efficiency and precision. Owners wanted more than bragging rights. They wanted reliability, range, and the sense that their machines could stand up to the punishment of long miles. The Shovelhead was pitched as that answer, promising a 10% power increase over the panhead thanks to improved combustion and airflow. For many riders, that bump meant easier highway cruising at modern speeds, especially as interstates expanded and expectations shifted from casual cruising to long-distance touring. The new engine also aligned with Harley's push into the Electra Glide, a model that symbolized the brand's ambition to offer luxury, comfort, and endurance without sacrificing attitude. If the panhead was the bridge between post-war optimism and mid-century modernity, the Shovelhead was Harley's bold attempt to anchor itself in an era of booming horsepower. But the decision-making process was not as smooth as the advertising suggested. Engineers were constrained by Harley's limited resources and by the reality of mass-producing a machine that had to stay affordable. For that reason, the Shovelhead was in many ways an evolutionary step, rather than a revolutionary leap. Yet to the riders of 1966, even small improvements in power and performance made a world of difference, especially for those pulling heavy loads or outfitting their bikes for touring. The ownership reality of the Shovelhead, however, went beyond simple numbers. Riders discovered that this engine had character, for better and worse. It offered thrilling acceleration and the unmistakable sound that Harley fans cherished, but it also carried quirks, oil seepage, heat issues, and maintenance demands that required commitment from the owner. To many, that was part of the charm, a machine that demanded as much from you as you did from it. To truly understand the Shovelhead's significance, we need to look at how it was received in its early years, how riders embraced or criticized it, and how its reputation was forged on highways, backroads, and in garages across America. That's where the story moves next, into the cultural reception and the way this 1966 V-twin became both a lightning rod for debate and a symbol of a new riding era. The Harley-Davidson Shovelhead of 1966 quickly became more than just an engine upgrade. It became a touchstone for how riders, the market, and even rivals judged what an American motorcycle should be. In its first years, reception was a blend of excitement and skepticism. Enthusiasts appreciated the extra punch, the sleeker look, and the pairing with flagship touring bikes like the Electra Glide. Yet complaints about oil leaks, heat, and constant tinkering spread just as quickly. This dual reputation, powerful but imperfect, was part of what gave the Shovelhead its distinct place in motorcycling culture. For riders who wanted a machine with personality, the flaws weren't deal breakers. They were proof that the bike had a soul. The late 60s and early 70s were also a time of competition from another manufacturer across the Pacific, bringing lighter, faster, and more precise machines that highlighted Harley's rough edges. Instead of folding under pressure, the Shovelhead leaned into its American identity, becoming the sound and silhouette of a growing counterculture. Films, music, and media showcased this engine as the soundtrack of rebellion, every throaty rumble reinforcing the idea that riding a Shovelhead meant freedom and defiance. But beyond image, the aftermarket scene expanded because of this engine's quirks. Custom builders learned how to coax more power, improve reliability, and turn each machine into a statement. Independent shops thrived on fixing what the factory hadn't perfected, and owners wore that process like a badge of honor. If you could keep a Shovelhead running strong, you proved your devotion. Touring clubs embraced it for long-haul journeys, while others chopped it down into lean, stripped-down customs that dominated American roadsides and rallies. Regulation also loomed large. Emissions and safety standards in the 70s forced Harley to stretch the Shovelhead further than originally intended. Instead of replacing it quickly, Harley kept reworking the platform, resulting in larger displacements, first 74 cubic inches, then 80, giving more grunt but also amplifying stress on the engine. These iterations reveal both the flexibility and the fragility of the design. It could be adapted but only so far, yet the very act of adapting became part of the story. The Shovelhead wasn't frozen in time. It was a living, evolving motor that tracked the struggles and triumphs of its manufacturer and its riders alike. By the late 70s, the Shovelhead was everywhere in the US, from police fleets to custom showpieces, and its growl was unmistakable. Its presence on American highways told the world that Harley-Davidson still stood for big, unapologetic motorcycles. But that same presence carried the weight of expectations. Could an engine with such clear strengths and weaknesses remain relevant as the industry modernized? That question would define the Shovelhead's legacy and lead us into its eventual replacement. To see why it endured, and why it still matters decades later, we have to explore what the Shovelhead meant in hindsight and how it shaped the future of the brand long after 1966. The Harley-Davidson Shovelhead of 1966 may have started as a technical update to the Panhead, but over time it became a cultural cornerstone that outgrew its mechanical limitations. By the early 80s, when it was finally replaced by the Evolution engine, the Shovelhead had cemented itself as the power plant of a generation that refused to compromise. Its legacy lies in more than horsepower numbers. It's in the way riders formed identities around it, customizing, repairing, and pushing the engine beyond what the factory ever envisioned. Those who rode Shovelheads in their prime remember the constant maintenance as a kind of ritual, a shared understanding that every oil stain and roadside fix was part of the bond between rider and machine. That bond is why, even today, collectors and enthusiasts chase down original Shovelhead bikes or restore tired engines into proud runners. The look of the rocker boxes, the unique cadence of its idle, the way it filled highways with sound. These details matter because they defined the American motorcycle experience at a time when other manufacturers were offering smoother but less soulful alternatives. The Shovelhead's imperfections became part of its myth. If you owned one, you weren't just a rider, you were part of a brotherhood that valued grit over polish. In hindsight, the Shovelhead also laid the groundwork for Harley-Davidson's survival. Without this engine keeping the brand visible and desirable in the 60s and 70s, it's hard to imagine the company weathering the storm of foreign competition and regulatory change. It became a blueprint for balancing tradition with incremental progress, never straying too far from the DNA that riders cherished, yet evolving just enough to remain viable. Today, Shovelheads represent a kind of authenticity that can't be replicated by modern machines. They're the living link between the rough-and-tumble 60s and the cruiser culture that followed. The engine that debuted in 1966 wasn't perfect, but its influence stretched well beyond its production years. To understand its true impact, all you have to do is look at how the Shovelhead remains a touchstone for builders, riders, and dreamers who want their motorcycle to mean something more than a ride. That is why the Shovelhead endures, not just as a piece of hardware, but as the heartbeat of an era that refuses to be forgotten. The Harley-Davidson Shovelhead of 1966 stands as a reminder that engineering decisions ripple far beyond the drawing board. This engine wasn't just an upgrade, it was the spine of a cultural era. In its day, it gave riders the extra horsepower needed for the expanding American freeway system, paired with a look that became instantly recognizable and synonymous with freedom on two wheels. Ownership, however, demanded patience. Anyone considering a Shovelhead today must understand that reliability is a mixed bag. Oil leaks, heat, and frequent maintenance are part of the experience, but for enthusiasts, that's part of the reward. Collectors often seek out the early 74 cubic inch versions for originality, while the later 80 cubic inch variants deliver more grunt, but also more strain. Prices on the US market vary widely. Restored examples can climb high, while project bikes remain relatively attainable for those willing to wrench. Parts availability is still solid thanks to a strong aftermarket, though finding untouched examples is increasingly rare. For today's buyers, the Shovelhead represents an entry into a community as much as into a machine. Owning one links you to decades of riders who embraced its quirks as character rather than flaw. Import regulations are less of a concern in the States since it was a domestic product, but condition and history matter immensely. Knowing whether a bike has been maintained, modified, or pieced together will make all the difference in ownership satisfaction. The takeaway for US viewers is simple. The Shovelhead rewards those who value tradition and authenticity over convenience. It isn't the smoothest or most refined choice, but it offers something many modern bikes cannot: a living connection to the raw, unpolished spirit of motorcycling in America. In the end, the 1966 Shovelhead proved that sometimes power and imperfection together create legend, and that legend still rides every time one of these engines fires up. It remains the machine that turned mechanical grit into cultural gold, and its echo on the highway is still unmistakable. The final word is this: the Shovelhead doesn't just run, it roars across time.